It's getting on to about 9:30 in the morning, and the fog is starting to lift, and sun will be breaking momentarily through this vineyard here, and getting some sunlight onto the vines. These cool days help in the maturation because it's more even temperatures than if we had very cold nights in the 40s and had to try to warm up to 80 or 90 degrees. There's a big shift, but the more moderate temperatures, it just has a better influence on ripening at a steady pace. We're going through and doing a final thinning pass. So if the canes are very short, and this is not a short cane by any means, we would limit it to one cluster, or if it's really a short cane, and I'll show you some examples, we would take both clusters off. And the same is that we're taking off what we call the shoulders, and this is considered a shoulder or a wing, so we would remove that as well. And if the cluster is really long and straggly, we might take off the rat tail or the green berries at the bottom, as well as if the canopy is pretty dense with leaves, we're going to opening up some canopy and cutting back some of the canes for better exposure onto the fruit that's in the center. And as you can see here too, as I'm pulling these dry leaves off, it is part of the steps of early maturity. The leaves have used up all the components in them, and they're starting to fall off. They're starting to turn yellow and senesce. And kind of again, just massaging the fruit before final harvest. So we're looking at the overall balance of the vines and the display of fruit, if you will, and how it's displayed out. So again, for example, looking in here is a really small green shoot, and we're going to actually, I'm going to just remove this whole shoot anyway because it's not contributing anything to the vine. This bunch here has got a lot more green berries. It's about 40% going through veraison, whereas a lot of the other fruit on this vine is pretty much all the way through veraison, so we would snip that off. Shoulders and wings, as I mentioned, like here is off the main cluster that's behind the stake, so we would snip that off too. Same with this wing right here, we would snip that off and just leave the primary cluster. This small shoot, which is probably about 14 inches long, will not mature this cluster properly at the same rate and same time as the rest of the fruit, so we would just go ahead and snip it off. Shoulder and wing off. Some of this pink fruit is just overexposure from the sun when we had the heat wave a couple weeks ago, and it will slowly color up and be a good component for the wine. Just in looking at the work that was done after the workers have been on this vine, you can see to me that there's a good balance of fruit left on the canopy and the vine, as well as what's on the ground, the removal. Good nice berries, clusters that are here, long clusters, full. Still has a few green berries, but they will catch up. And nicely displayed, and for the most part just nice fruit that's left on this particular vine right here, with the removal of probably 10 or 15 clusters overall. There's probably 30 to 35 clusters remaining here. The leaves are nice and dark green. The canes are lignified almost to the ends. Lignification is the browning of the canes, the hardening of the cane, if you will. And that's a good sign that it's also putting energy and carbohydrates into the maturity. If we have a lot of green canes, that means the vines are still basically actively growing and we're not throwing anything back into the maturity cycle. So we're at the point of maturity. We call this bloom this kind of pale purple color, if you will, this dust. If you were looking on furniture, but by just rubbing it, you can see that we have this nice little protection around the berry. But you can be rubbed off, but most desirable is to have something like that. And there's nice little spray residue from the last mildew spray. It's still here on the berry. It's very well coated, protecting it from mildew spores. There's some white, and again, that's from the spraying operation. In my opinion, it's not a negative, it's a positive, because I can see it. I know they did a good job on putting on the right sprays and the right quantity onto these vines to protect them against mildew. As we just mentioned earlier about the fog starting to lift, a good indication is when the fog is starting to lift, we start to get a little bit of air movement. And you look up above me here and you start to see the canes starting to do a little dance. It's because the air is starting to move as the fog is lifting and the sun is starting to break. And so we're going to start our day warming shortly. One of the indicators for me as a viticulturist, especially on a vineyard of this age, is the fact that this is an average length cane right here, and it's approximately 3.5 feet long. There's two beautiful clusters right here. And it stopped growing, and that's what we look at, is to make sure that these canes have stopped growing at some point. In other words, there's no active growing tip here anymore. It's come to a halt at the point of sizing and the development of the fruit. And where we've had to cut some canes, yes, that was to help access us as far as walking through or getting our mildew sprays on or not. But in general, when I look up here, I see this cane has stopped growing, this cane here has stopped growing, this cane here has stopped growing from the adjacent vine up above, and all of these. We're at a perfect balance between crop load and vine vigor. And again, you look at that and say, you know, there's a few clusters on the ground, not very many, because those probably came off of the short shoots or where there was a little bit of compaction of fruit, but in general we're pretty well balanced out. There's no runaway canes to speak of. You know, we don't have them still growing actively. They're all slowed down, and it's perfect. If we had to pick the perfect world, we have it right here.